Christian Parenting.
Hi, Lee. Welcome to the Christian Parenting Podcast.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you. I just love
Yeah.
your podcast. I love the emphasis on Christian parenting. Of course, I've experienced what it's like to be an atheist parent as well as a Christian parent, and it's a night and day difference. And I appreciate you building into Christian parents the way you should do.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like we could have two conversations now, one about that and one
Yeah,
about the
right.
supernatural. Today we're talking about the supernatural, and I'm really excited about that. But now that you just said that, I'm like, wait, we need to pivot. So you're going to
Well,
have
I
to come
tell
back
you,
and talk about that.
whatever. I'd love to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. I feel like you don't really need that much of an introduction, but I would love for you to tell us about yourself. Tell us what you do. Tell us just a little bit of your story, and then tell us about your family too, because we care about families here at Christian Parenting.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my background's in journalism and law. I was legal editor of the Chicago Tribune newspaper, and an atheist, a skeptic most of my life. I tend to be someone who looks at evidence and facts and logic and rationality, and just thought the idea of God and heaven and hell was absurd, a legend. I didn't even take it seriously enough to investigate it. So I met my wife when we were 14 years old, just on a random encounter on a street corner in Chicago. And she went home and told her mom, I met the boy I'm going to marry. And sure enough, we got married. I was 20. She was 19. We just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary.
Oh my goodness.
And
congratulations.
Thank you. And she was kind of a spiritual, I don't know, I call her an agnostic. She just couldn't put the pieces together. And then we moved into a condo in Chicago, and the woman downstairs was a Christian. And she became best friends with Leslie, my wife, shared Jesus with her, took her to church. And then my wife gave me the bad news for an atheist, which is that she'd become a Christian. And the first word that went through my mind was divorce. But then I thought, what if I could liberate her from this cult that she's gotten involved in? So I figured I could use my journalism training and legal training and disprove the resurrection of Jesus. How hard can that be? People don't come back from the dead after 3 days, right? So I thought I could disprove it in a long weekend. And ended up spending 2 years of my life delving into the evidence for God, largely the resurrection of Jesus, because that really is the linchpin of the faith. And finally, on November the 8th of 1981, coming to the conclusion that in light of the avalanche of evidence that points so powerfully toward the truth of Christianity, it would have taken more faith to maintain my atheism than to become a Christian. In other words, the scales just went like that. They just, I realized this is true. And that's when I repented of my sin, received Christ as my forgiver and leader, and my life began to change. My values, my character, my morality, my attitudes, my relationships, my parenting, my marriage. I mean, over time, all these things began to change for the good. And so we have 2 children. Both are in ministry. Son is a PhD in theology, and he's a professor of theology at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University, teaching future pastors about Jesus. And my daughter, Allison, is a homeschooling expert. She has a website called goodschooling.net, where she helps people get into homeschooling if they think that's the direction they want to go to raise their children. And all my 4 grandchildren, I have 4 grandchildren, ranging in age from 19 to 12. They're all homeschooled. And my daughter is also a novelist. She's written half a dozen novels, fiction, but they all have the gospel woven into them. And her husband, who is a seminary graduate, write children's books about God. So we just really enjoy our family. Leslie and I moved to Texas to be near our daughter and her husband, our 2 oldest grandkids. But we see all of them on a regular basis, and it's the joy of our life to see now the grandchildren, one by one, coming to faith in Jesus.
Isn't that so amazing? Can you imagine telling yourself before your wife turns to a Christian, like, this is what your future is going to look like? Like, what would you have said?
There's no way I could have conceived it. I mean, I was successful in my career. I was writing books. I was doing television, radio. I was, at the largest newspaper between the 2 coasts. And God just said, give it all up. And I took a 60% pay cut, went to work at a church, and never thought I'd write again. I thought this was going to be my ministry. I'm going to become a pastor, and ultimately began writing. And now I've written more than 40 books on Jesus and the evidence historically and from science for the existence of God and the truth of Christianity. I never could have foreseen it. And yet, I think what would have happened if I had said no to those promptings of God when he was saying, I want you to leave behind all you've prepared for, all the training in journalism and law, leave that behind. I want you to take a different path. If I had said no, all that I would have missed. that God's taken me on so many adventures. I mean, I've just had so many great adventures where I've got to share Jesus with, the likes of Evil Knievel and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the number one atheist in the world, Anthony Flew. And I've just had these great adventures of sharing my faith all around the world. And it's been the greatest joy of my life.
That's so amazing. I just love that. Only God can do that
Yeah,
and turn it
that's
into an
true.
adventure, make
Yeah.
it so fun. And it's so cool to see how the generational impact that
Yeah.
your decision has had in not just your kids, but your grandkids too. Like, what a gift. I love that. But today, okay, so, and God is also really faithful because now you just as of late, you're a 2 times New York Times bestselling author with your newest book. And that's what we're going to talk about today is seeing the supernatural. And I think it's just a really interesting topic because it's something that we don't really talk about a lot. Like maybe
I
people
know.
will mention angels, but like in a completely theologically inaccurate way most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But the supernatural is real. And we do talk about it in culture too, just maybe not from a Christian perspective. But you share that, what is it, 8 in 10 Americans believe in something spiritual beyond the physical
Yes.
world. Almost 50% report having sensed something from the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
69% believe in God, angels, and heaven, but only 58% believe in heaven or believe in hell and the devil,
Yeah.
because that's way more uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
most Americans believe in some type of supernatural like element of life. It's just a matter of what people believe. And so
Yes.
I would love to start with, as a former atheist, like
Yeah.
what made you decide I'm going to investigate the supernatural realm now and then write about it?
Well, you touched on something I think is so true, and which is that we don't talk about this as much as you would think we would. I've been a Christian now since 1981. I can't remember ever hearing one sermon on the topic of angels. I just don't recall hearing that. And I think what's happened in our culture is so many Christians want to be accepted by other people. And so they want to be accepted by their neighbors. And they say, yeah, of course I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus. But I'm just like you. I'm a normal person. I'm not weird. I don't believe in any of that odd stuff. And so we don't talk about angels and demons and the supernatural realm. And I think it impoverishes us because this is a very enriching area to explore, especially the topic of angels. I mean, I learned things that I didn't know as I did my research, because my approach to this book and other books is that I'm not the world's leading expert on some of this stuff. I find the world's leading experts and I sit them down and I interview them and ask them the tough questions I had when I was a skeptic and see if they can give me good answers. So I learned a lot about the supernatural realm. And my hope is, as you mentioned, 8 out of 10 Americans believe there's something beyond what we can see and touch. I'm hoping that becomes a bridge where Christians will read the book, their faith will be deepened and they'll be encouraged. But then I hope they give it away to a spiritually confused neighbor or friend or family member. And that the curiosity that they have in the supernatural would lead them to read the book and that they might come to faith because the gospel is clearly in the book. And I'm an evangelist at heart. I want to see people's lives and eternities change. So that's my hope.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting because there are so many people that I talk to on a regular basis who are like, we're spiritual. Like
Yeah.
we're the same. Like you and me, we have the same beliefs because we're spiritual. And it's like,
Right.
well, no, we're
Right.
different. That's a different belief. So
Right.
there's so much there because people are talking about it. It's just maybe the
Yes.
church isn't, because it is a little confusing. So we'll get to more of that in a minute. But
Yeah.
I would love for you to share just some of the stories that you have encountered, that you
Yeah.
experienced while researching the supernatural, because you talk about a lot. You talk about dreams
Yes.
and deathbed experiences, and
Yes.
you touch on heaven and hell, like you get into the theology of
Yes.
that, angels. So tell us some of the stories that just really touched your heart or
Yeah.
encouraged your faith.
Yeah, one area I investigate is documented miracles. I'm not looking for stuff that I hear on the internet. I want documented stuff. So I'm going to peer-reviewed medical journals and looking for case studies that have been researched by medical researchers and so forth. And for 2 reasons. Number one, if miracles are happening today, it points toward not only a supernatural realm, but God himself intervening supernaturally in our world. But secondly, it gives us confidence in the gospels. Because when I was an atheist, if I would open up the gospels and I would read, oh, Jesus did miracles, it's like, you can't do miracles. That violates the laws of nature. Miracles are impossible. So I would shut the book and think that this was legendary. But if miracles are happening today and we can document them, then they could have happened in the first century. So that gives credibility to the gospels. So I have a chapter on miracles. And one of my favorite stories is that I encountered is a woman who was blind with an incurable condition for over a dozen years. She went to a school for the blind. She learned to read Braille. She walked with a white cane, and she married a Baptist pastor. And one night they're getting ready to go to bed, and she's in bed, and he comes over to her and puts his hand on her shoulder, and he begins to pray, and he begins to cry, and he says, Lord, I know you can heal my wife. I know you can do that. And Lord, I pray that you do it tonight. And with that, she opened her eyes to perfect vision. And that vision has remained for 47 years. And she said, I was blind when my husband prayed for me. I opened my eyes to perfect vision. It's a miracle. I can see. And this is a case that had been documented by 4 medical researchers, published as a case study in a medical journal. And what do you do with that? To me, that is clear evidence of a supernatural intervention by God, unless you say at the outset, I'm ruling out the possibility of the supernatural. That's the only way I think you can get around that not being a supernatural healing. So I look at stuff like that, like miracles, which to me are absolutely fascinating. I look at stuff like supernatural dreams that are happening in the Middle East. This is a fascinating phenomenon. In the Bible, we see supernatural dreams in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. There are about 200 references in the Bible to dreams and visions. And so it's a biblical concept. But what we're seeing is that we have more Muslims becoming Christians in the last couple of decades than we have in the 1400 years since Muhammad. And a quarter to a third of them have had a supernatural dream about Jesus Christ.
That is
And
wild.
It's absolutely wild, and it's happening all over the Middle East. And here's what I like about it as a researcher, as a skeptic. What does not happen is that Muslims are going to sleep, having a dream about Jesus, and waking up as a Christian. That's not what's happening. There's always external corroboration of the dream. So here's a typical dream. A woman named Noor, a mother of 8 in Cairo. She has a Jesus dream. Jesus appears. It's the most vivid dream she's ever had. And she's mesmerized by Jesus, the love and the grace. She didn't feel any shame for the first time in her life. And she's walking with Jesus along a lakeshore, and she says, Jesus, she's just enthralled by him. And she says, Jesus, why do you appear to me? I'm just a poor mother of 8. And Jesus said, my friend will tell you why tomorrow. And she said, who's your friend? And Jesus gestures to a man who was walking with them along the lakeshore. Well, she hadn't noticed him because she was so mesmerized by Jesus. And so she sees this, and Jesus says, my friend will tell you. She wakes up from her dream. The next day, she goes to the crowded marketplace in Cairo, and she meets the man from her dream. She sees him. She walks up to him. You're the one. He said, what are you talking about? You're the guy. Same glasses, same face, same clothes. You're the one. And he said, do you have a dream about Jesus? Yes. Well, it turned out he was an underground church planter.
Wow.
He didn't want to go to the crowded marketplace in Cairo on Friday afternoon. It's so chaotic, but he felt like God had an assignment for him. So he went that day. He encounters Noor. He pulls, and here's the key. He pulls her aside. He opens the Bible, and he shares the gospel with her. That's how these are taking place. So there's external corroboration of these dreams. There's another instance where there was a man, we'll call him Omar. He grew up in a refugee camp. He hated Jewish people. His goal in life was to kill as many Jewish people as he could. So he's a young man now, and he, in his late teens, and he says, I'm going to join Hamas, this terrorist organization. So he's going to a meeting to enroll and join Hamas. And he's walking down the street, and all of a sudden he's confronted by a vision of this man in white who he recognizes intuitively as being Jesus. And this man in white says, Omar, this is not the plan I have for your life. I want you to turn around. I want you to go home. This is not how I want you to live your life. So he's shocked by this, and he goes home. And later that day, there's a Christian family who is moving into the same apartment building right across the hallway from him. So he goes over and he says, I just had this vision with Jesus. He told me to go home, and he tells him the whole story. He says, what does this mean? And the Christian opens the Bible, shares the gospel with him. Omar not only becomes a Christian, but today he's an underground church planter in the Middle East. So
amazing.
This is so common in the Middle East that in the Cairo newspaper, often you'll see an ad, and the ad just says, call this number and we'll tell you about the man in white you met in your dream last night. And people
Why
call
do you
up.
think it's so common? Because you hear about dreams and things like
Yes.
that here in
Yes.
America, but not
Yes.
that often.
Yes.
And if it's that common that it's in the newspaper or like
Yes.
on billboards, I think also, like,
Right.
why do you think that is?
I think it's because in many Middle Eastern countries, it's not only culturally dangerous to consider Christianity. In other words, a typical devout Muslim has no incentive to have a dream about Jesus who might lead him into apostasy and maybe a death sentence in a strict Muslim culture. So in that culture, and in some Muslim countries, it's actually illegal to share Jesus Jesus, to share the gospel. And it's
Right.
as if God is saying, you think that's going to stop me? I love these people. I love them with all my son died for them. So I'll just go directly with these dreams and lead them to someone who's going to explain the gospel to them. And I think it's God's way of kind of winking at us and saying, you know what? Watch this. I'll show you that you can't shut me out. You can't exclude my gospel from the people I love. I'll show you what I'm going to do. And I think that's just his way of spreading his gospel in a unique way around a very challenging area of the world.
Yeah. Okay, tell us one more story and then I have more questions.
Yeah.
But I want to hear one more.
Oh gosh, there's so many. There's a
There's
guy
so
named
many.
There is. I'll give you another area is near deathbed visions. This is fascinating to me. This is a kind of a new area. Now, tens of thousands of these cases have been investigated. This is a very common phenomenon. Now, we see it in the Bible. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen, described as being full of the Holy Spirit, he is about to be killed for his faith. And he looks up and he sees the heavens open up and he sees the Father and the Son in heaven. And so that's a pre-death vision, a vision that someone is going to have right before they die. Well, these are incredibly common. I just had dinner in Oklahoma City with 7 people, and 3 of them had family stories about deathbed visions in their families. There's a huge hospice facility in New York State, and researchers went to them where all these people are dying and said, look, if you have a vivid vision, unlike anything you've ever had, would you please tell us? Because a lot of people are embarrassed by it because they think, oh, you're going to think I have dementia or whatever. So they don't say anything. No, we would like to know. Well, guess what? 88% of them had a pre-death vision. And here's the corroboration. Again, I'm looking for corroboration. How do I know this is true? I'll tell you the story about true story, researched by medical researchers of a woman named Doris. And she was in Memorial Hospital in London, England, dying. She's on her deathbed. She sees, just like Stephen did, heavens open up. She sees angelic beings. She sees her father, who had died several years earlier, who's kind of there to welcome her into the realm to come. And then she gets a puzzled look on her face and she says, wait a minute, what's Vida doing there? Vida's with my father. Why would Vida be there? It doesn't make any sense. And then she died. Well, Vida was her sister, and her sister had died a couple of weeks earlier, but nobody had told Doris because she was so ill. They didn't want the shock to kill her. So they withheld that news from Doris. And yet, not knowing that Vida had died, she saw her in heaven in the realm to come. That to me is corroboration that something's going on here. And we see it in children. In Luke 16, verse 22, Jesus is telling the story about a rich man and a beggar who both died. And the rich man goes to torment, but the beggar goes to a place of bliss. And in verse 22, Luke 16, 22, Jesus said, angels carried Lazarus to this place of bliss. And one of the most common phenomena that we see are people on their deathbed will see angels coming for them. Charles Templeton, the most famous skeptic in Canada, an atheist who wrote an ugly book against God, who did end up coming to faith at the end of his life. And on his deathbed, he said, Madeline, to his wife, do you see them? What are you talking about, Chuck? The angels, they're coming for me. They're in this room. Oh, their singing is so beautiful. I'm going to spend eternity with God. Oh, they're coming for me, Madeline. But here's the corroboration. Children who are dying see angels coming for them in a way that you would not expect. And here's what I mean. For a child, what does an angel look like? A cartoon, right? A caricature. It's big wings, right? These white figures with big wings. Well, the Bible doesn't say that all angels have wings, but children who are dying will often see angels. And you would think if this was just something their subconscious was conjuring up, they would see angels with wings. That's not what they see. So I read a doctoral dissertation by a woman who studied this phenomenon. And she reports the case of a child who was dying. And I don't know, she was 4 or 5 years old. And she said to her mom, Mommy, do you see them? The angels, they're in this room. They're coming for me. Oh, they're so beautiful. Look at their eyes. They're so wonderful. They're coming for me. And her mother didn't want to disappoint her. So she said, oh, well, yeah, I see them. Look at their big wings. And the little girl said, oh, Mommy, you don't have to lie. They don't have big wings. And she went on to describe them in great detail. That to me is a form of corroboration. I think that the fact that these deathbed visions are so common is a form of corroboration. If they only happen once in a blue moon, then an atheist would say, oh, well, every once in a while something weird's going to happen, so that doesn't mean anything. But they are so common that I don't think you can write them off for that reason. And then these children seeing angels not as you would expect them to be seen, but as they really are, which is mostly without wings.
Yeah. Both my grandmothers had near death visions. And
No
it gave us
kidding.
so much peace when they described what they were
Yes.
seeing and where they were going. I mean, it was truly beautiful to hear them describe what they were
Wow.
seeing.
See, isn't
Yeah.
that amazing that here we've never met before and you have a
Yeah.
story about it. And you know what's interesting about children who are dying? You drop a child off to a daycare center or to a babysitter or something, and they freak out. It's like, I don't want to be alone. I want to be with my parents. I want to. And yet, so many children who are dying, who have
Mhm.
these pre death visions, are comforting their parents and saying, Mommy, it's okay. I know where I'm going. I met Jesus. I saw a vision of Jesus. He's coming for me. I've seen the angels. It's okay, Mommy. And you see these children who, because of these deathbed visions, have such confidence of where they're going. But
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating that you've got
Yeah.
family stories. And I would encourage your viewers, your next family gathering where you have at Easter or Christmas or whatever, and you have extended family there. See if people have stories about Aunt Beth or Uncle Jim or whatever. When I was doing this research, I said to my wife, I said, man, these pre-death visions are fascinating. She said, honey, don't you remember? My dad and my mom both had pre-death visions. I'd
Mhm.
forgotten about it. In
Yeah.
fact, her father had seen um, his sister who had died, and he didn't know she had died. She had died 2 days earlier. Nobody had told him that she had died, and yet he saw her in his pre-death vision, just like the story of Doris I just told you. This is 20 years ago. I'd forgotten about it. So it's incredibly common.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're so powerful. So I would
Yeah,
love to hear kind of your thought on how do you explain some of this to kids? Because
yeah,
again, people are talking about this and people can hear these stories and like, oh, this is the universe doing that, or explain it in not a biblical
right.
perspective. So how can parents explain some of these supernatural occurrences, angels, these
Yeah.
visions, these dreams from a biblical
I,
perspective without fear or confusion?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important for our kids to understand that our theology, our doctrine, our beliefs are not based on deathbed visions and near death experiences and dreams, mystical dreams. They are based on the Bible. And so that is our plumb line. And that is what we can trust as being the measure by which we investigate all of these phenomena. Now, for instance, on near death experiences and deathbed visions, theologians have studied those and say they are entirely consistent with Christian doctrine. But I don't base my doctrine on deathbed visions or near death experiences. I base them on scripture. And that's why it's important to help children understand that we can trust what the Bible tells us about the world beyond. One of the projects I'm working on right now with my daughter, who has degrees in education and is a homeschooler and degrees in education that she's taught in secular and Christian schools, we're developing a curriculum on apologetics for children that starts in kindergarten and goes all the way through 12th grade to help even the youngest kids understand that we have a defensible faith. We have a faith that is rooted in reality. And so we're going to train kids starting at the earliest ages on how they can trust what the Bible tells us. And that's where we need to point our kids so that their beliefs are coming from scripture and not from stories that they read or hear on the playground.
Yeah, because while those stories are amazing and they can be affirming and give people encouragement, and mostly someone who's solid in their faith, to be like, "Wow, look what God can do." You know, you hear those stories, you're
Yes,
like, "Only God, only God." But
that's right.
biblical literacy is so important, and I think it's
Absolutely.
almost even more important starting at a young age now that our culture is so confused about
Yeah.
everything,
Yes. Yes,
basically.
that's exactly true. I was talking to a guy who said that his granddaughter is in kindergarten in a public school, and she was on the playground at recess, and she was getting harassed by the other children because she believes in God. And
Mhm.
you believe in fairy tales. You still believe in make believe. These are kindergartners in a public school harassing a little girl because she believes in God. Our children and our grandchildren are going to be challenged in their faith in ways that other generations have not been. We got to be heads up with this. We've got to help our kids from the earliest age to see that our faith is well placed. It's not based on mythology, legend, make believe, or wishful thinking. It is based on a solid foundation of truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would some of the encouragement be that you have for parents who want to teach their kids those things? Like, where can they start?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what can they do?
Well, one of the things we've done from the beginning is I've written these books on apologetics, which of course means defending the faith, reasons for why we believe. And I've written a number of books on that topic. But from the beginning, we said we need to help children understand this. And so we've done children's books based on my books, and we've done books for teenagers based on my book. In fact, get this, I got a letter the other day from a woman. She said, my husband in June is going to graduate from seminary. He's going to be a pastor. He became a follower of Jesus at age 7, reading your children's book about the evidence for Christ. And she said, would you please write him a note of encouragement? Oh my gosh, of course. Are you kidding me? This is awesome. Children, most people who come to faith, it's at a young age. And so that's why we've done our books that are the Case for Christ for Kids and the student editions and the young readers editions. There's a variety of them that people can rely on and trust to present solid evidence for why we believe what we believe. And there's other things too. J. Warner Wallace, another former atheist who's written a number of books along these lines. There's other books out there, but I would encourage parents at a young age to help their kids see when we teach them the Bible, this is important. When we teach them about the Bible, don't just teach them about values. In other words, and this was pointed out to me by a woman who's an apologist. She said, at a lot of Sunday schools, they teach kids values from the Bible. So David, let's look at the story of David. What's the value we want to teach you? It's the value of courage because he fought Goliath. Moses, let's look at the story of Moses. What's the value we learn? Leadership. Well, guess what? Atheists believe in leadership and in courage too. We need to go beyond just teaching vague values. We need to teach our young kids why they can trust the Bible, why it can be the guide for their life. And so, let's go beyond just teaching vague feel-good stories from the Bible. Let's help them understand this is something they can dig their roots into and grow the rest of their life, drawing nutrients from the truth of Scripture.
Yeah, because they're going to get questions.
Yeah,
From kids on
absolutely.
the playground to people they're in school with to people they work with. That this is something I experienced. How do you explain it? Or this is
Yes,
what I believe. Why do you believe what you believe? So if we can
exactly.
give them that gift of faith young, it is just so powerful.
Yeah,
So powerful.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I love your story too and everything you're doing because I think it is true that most people have their worldview developed by 13,
Yeah.
which puts so much pressure on Christian parents because we're like, oh, we
Yes.
have to do all the things
Yeah.
and teach them everything and we have to do it perfectly. And we are not about perfection at Christian
No.
parenting, but it's true. Like we want to encourage our kids in the faith and teach them apologetics. And we have so many amazing resources now that
Yeah.
make it easy to do that. But also everybody's faith is their own and it's never
Yes.
too late.
Yeah.
It is never too late.
One of the great experiences I had was to watch the spiritual transformation, one of the most unlikely candidates, and it was Evel Knievel, who was a great motorcycle daredevil rider, who was a drunkard and was a womanizer and was a gambler and, went to prison for beating up a business associate with a baseball bat. And yet he's on the beach in Florida and God spoke to him on the inside. He said, Lee, it wasn't through my ear, it was through my heart, where God said, Robert, which is his real name, Robert, I've rescued you more times than you'll ever know. Now you need to come to me through my son, Jesus. And he ends up reading my book, The Case for Christ, and he becomes a devout follower of Jesus Christ, 180-degree change in his character. When he was baptized, he told his story with such sincerity and conviction that 700 people got out of their seats, came forward, received Christ, and were baptized on the spot. But what I want to mention about him is his biggest regret, we became friends, and his biggest regret was not coming to faith as a child. He said, Lee, when you talk to parents, when you talk to children, when you talk to teenagers, just tell them the gospel, plant seeds that can later come to fruition. But he said, my biggest regret is I wasted my life. And yeah, he was this big cultural icon, multimillionaire. He said, Lee, I wasted my life. I could have lived my life for Jesus Christ, and I didn't. And that was his biggest lament. And I just say to parents, we do our best. We make mistakes. We try our best, but we're going to plant seeds. And your kids are going to see things in you that may not bring them to faith tomorrow, but may bloom later in their life when they think back to how you handle situations and how you shared the gospel with them and so forth. Doesn't mean they're going to come to faith at age 10 or 12 or 13. but it may plant a seed and you're going to see that come to fruition later. But I just think of Evel Knievel telling me over and over again, lamenting a wasted life. And so that has given me passion for young people and to say, let's reach them when they're young. And that doesn't mean because they're naive or stupid. No, it means their hearts are open. The Bible talks about in Romans how we tend to suppress the evidence for God as we get older. And the Greek imagery for that suppression is like a pedal. So when we see the evidence for God, it's like we pushed on a pedal and we suppress that. But children are more open and they've not been tainted so much by the sins of our culture. And we can plant the seeds that may come to fruition right then, or it may take many, many years for that to happen. But the best thing we can do is follow Christ closely as we can and be salt and light in a way that is winsome and attractive to our children.
Yeah. Amen. You have so many amazing stories. I feel like we could just go for on and on and on and on, but we're running out of time. So can you tell us where we can connect with you so that people can read
Sure.
more of these stories and just get
Yeah.
more of your resources?
Yeah, I'm real active on Twitter or X or whatever they call it these days. And I'm on there 3 or 4 times a day. I like it because it's like my own newspaper days, like a headline. And so follow me and I'll follow you back. And I've made so many friends on X. I'll have to tell you stories about that. I actually had a miracle happen as a result of that. But so that's one way to connect with me. My website is leestrobel.com. And my books are available anywhere that books are available, and as well as the children's books and books for teenagers called the student editions of my other books. So I hope those resources are helpful. We've also done a lot of videos and training courses on how to share your faith and things like that.
Yeah. And I'll make sure all that stuff, all the resources that you mentioned are links that parents can easily find it, because I do think we really need quality resources and you're providing that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
I love it. Let's do it again sometime.
Yes, I would love it.
Now that I'm a
For sure.
grandfather, when you're a grandfather and you begin to build into your grandchildren, you see a whole new perspective on parenthood.
Yeah. No, seriously, I would love to have you back. So we can
That'd be
definitely
great.
count on
Well,
it.
God bless you and all your listeners.
Thank you.
Christian parenting.